Hi guys. I would like to start this video by thanking everyone who has been killing the likes and views this month. I really appreciate it. I have been trying to grow my channel for years, and every time you guys watch or like, it helps. And now, on to the video. Enjoy. So about 5 years ago, some friends and I went camping in the state park in South Carolina. We were in high school and went with our ROTC instructor. This guy was in his 50s, but he was still an ox. He was a sergeant major while in the army and was the definition of a badass. So the first night camping, it was really cold, so we decided to sleep around the fire. We all woke up at the same time in the middle of the night to the smell of wet dog and rotten flesh. We decided it might just be the damp leaves, and we slept through the rest of the night. We wake up the next morning, and there were paw prints all over the place. I'm not talking about just around the outskirts of the site. I mean, there were paw prints 4 feet away from where I laid my head that night. We were all pretty creeped out about that, so we decided to head into town to get some lunch. We stayed in town the rest of the day and headed back to the site around dusk. My friends and I are in the back of the truck as we drive down the gravel road to the site. Then all of a sudden, Sergeant Major slams on the brakes, and we come to a stop in the middle of the road. We all jumped up and looked over the cab to see what it was. Standing in the middle of the road was a hairless animal, around 50 pounds, standing on its hind legs. While still on its back legs, it walked to the side of the road and let out this god-awful screeching noise. It darted into the woods and left us all frozen in fear. Then we smelt it. The same terrible smell from the night before. We got into the cab and saw Sergeant Major like I had never seen him before. I was absolutely terrified. This creature we saw shook him to the core. We drove in silence for the rest of the ride back to the site. When we got there, he told us that we were leaving and to pack everything up. None of us have been back since, and Sergeant Major won't let ROTC camp there anymore. We agreed that what we saw looked like a mix between a bobcat and a coyote, but walked like a bear on its back legs. A few of my friends who hadn't heard the story decided to go up there one day, and said that the entire area gave off a really creepy vibe, and decided to leave. After I told them the story, it sealed the deal that none of us will be going back. I live in the north of Switzerland. We have a lot of old military bunkers from the Second World War. When I was 7 or 8, 3 friends of mine and I went out to explore one of these bunkers, which was built on a hillside in a small forest. The main door was jammed, so we had to break it up. We found a big log nearby and used it as a battering ram. After many tries, the door wouldn't budge, but there was a peephole. It was around 10 centimeters in diameter. We opened it, and it illuminated the dark inside. There was a long, ruined, and dark hallway with rooms on the left and right. We couldn't see to the end of the hallway. It was just too long. Every one of us wanted to catch a glimpse of the inside, when one of my friends says, "There's a small light at the end of the hallway." This light wasn't there when I watched through the peephole, so I pushed him away to take a second look. What I saw gave me the shivers. It was not a small light. It looked more like a flashlight pointed directly toward me, and behind it was a silhouette of a person. I walked a few steps back and said, "There's someone in there." At the same time, someone or something knocked on the door from the inside of the bunker. This was the moment we panicked and started screaming and ran away. I was so scared I ran straight home and locked the door. The next day at school, my friends and I talked about it. We came to the conclusion that probably some older kids had pranked us. 1 week later, we went back to the same bunker again. But as we saw the welded connection that should keep the door locked were rusty and not broken, we just left without saying a word to each other. It was impossible that someone opened this door before us, and this was the only entrance. I still live in the same region. Standing in front of this door again was not very comfortable. The story happened 20 years ago, but it looks exactly the same. Years ago, I fell asleep on my mother's living room sofa. She was already in bed, but my brother was out somewhere. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to see someone standing over me, covering me with a blanket. It looked like a man wearing a bandana. I assumed it was my brother, but thought it was strange for him to be wearing a hat. The next morning, I asked him about it, and he said he didn't even come into the living room when he came home, and it wasn't him who covered me up. My mother also denied doing it, and no one else was in the house that night. I didn't find it really creepy until a while later when one of my aunts stayed at my mom's house and reported the exact same thing. Apparently, there was a ghost in the house that wanted to make sure people were tucked in when they fell asleep on the sofa. My mother-in-law was a very funny and cool woman. She and my wife were really close, and sadly, she passed away when our son was around 4 months old. Flash forward a few years. We live in a 1930s era craftsman house in Pasadena, California. At this time, our son is about 3. I was giving him a bath one night, and he starts looking over my shoulder, not at random stuff, but at something specific. A moment passes and he asks me why Grandma calls Mommy a funny name. Long pause. I asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mother. He then asked why Grandma calls Mommy this nickname, specifically for my wife, that only her mother would call her. I was really set back by this. My wife and I never used the nickname. It was just what her mom called her since she was a baby. I asked him where he heard that. His reply was, "The farmer told me." I asked him who the farmer was, and he replied, "His friend." I tell my wife this story later, and she's of course reduced to tears over the whole nickname thing. We both know there is no way for him to know this, and we just kind of marvel at it. Flash forward to the next weekend, and my son is playing in his room. My wife is at work, and I'm at home. I hear him start talking like he's having a conversation. He's saying things like, "Yes, no, I don't know that." Then some laughing. I go into his room and ask him what he's doing, and he says, "Playing." I ask with who, and he says, "The farmer." At this point, I'm already thinking about the Exorcist movie and Captain Howdy. It's a little unsettling. I ask him where the farmer is. He says he left when I came in. Okay, so my wife gets home and I tell her this, and now she's just as weirded out as I am. We have no idea what to do and figure if it happens again, we'll have to do something. A few days later, in the middle of the night, we both overhear our son saying the following: "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." Wife and I go check on him, both of us freaked out. He's just sitting up in bed. I ask if he's okay, and he says, "Yeah, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." He never once mentioned the farmer again, not ever. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of it. But we do. Was at a friend's house when I passed out on the couch. Woke up a bit later and realized it was time for me to go. Got up and noticed my buddy's light on in his room, but the door was shut. Walked by the door and told him I was leaving because I had work in the morning. He said, "Yup, see ya." Went to the fridge to grab my drink, walked back by his room and said, "Later, dude." He said, "Yup." Something didn't seem right. Didn't sound quite like him, so I opened the door. No one there. No one was even in the house. Went outside and his truck was gone, so I freak out. Call his cell, and he had went to McDonald's 15 minutes before that. I bolted outside and waited for him to get home. He told me that the kid that used to live there years ago hung himself in the attic. And ever since he lived there, he noticed strange things and voices. This was confirmed by the neighbor, the kid's older brother. After that, just about anyone who goes over there has a weird experience. My buddy has dealt with it for years. When it gets weird, he yells out, "Leave me alone." And he said the weird vibes just stop for a bit, but they always come back. My mom had a seizure in her sleep. She was epileptic, got wrapped up in her blankets, and suffocated herself. Paramedics were able to get her breathing again and loaded her into an ambulance. This was very early in the morning, around 4:30. I was tasked with calling the family to tell them my mother was in the hospital. The first and most important phone call I had to make was to my grandmother, her mother. Before I had a chance to grab the phone and call, the phone rang, and it was my grandmother calling. This would have been about 5:30 in the morning, but about 2:30 in the morning in her time zone. She wanted to tell us that she saw my mother bathed in golden light and claimed they'd talked and that she was passed, but headed to a better place now. At this point, I didn't know my mother was going to die. My father was at the hospital with her and didn't know she was going to die yet either. The doctors didn't know she was brain dead yet, but somehow my grandmother knew and contacted me. There was this lady, we'll call her Annie, that was a friend of my mom's, and I lived with her for a few months after college. I worked second shift, so I was usually up late watching TV after everyone else was in bed. Annie comes walking into the living room, half asleep. I say, "What's going on, Annie?" And she says, "My grandmother just called." I'm like, No one has called. She insists that she just talked to her grandmother and that her grandmother called to tell her goodbye, and now she wants to call her family to check on her. Nonsense, I say. It was just a dream. Don't bother your family in the middle of the night. Go back to bed and call them in the morning. And she goes back to bed. About an hour later, I'm just getting into bed when the phone rings. It's her family calling to tell her that her grandmother died about an hour ago. The grandmother was old, but not sick, not on her deathbed or anything. Annie did not remember any of this the next day, and we never spoke of it. I thought about this for years and struggled with labeling it a ghost story or just an eerie coincidence. My skeptical and logical tendencies decided to label it a coincidence. The only times I've retold this story have been to people who don't know Annie in situations where everyone is telling their ghost stories. Then, about a decade later, Annie passed away unexpectedly. I went to her funeral, and her brother delivered a eulogy. In it, he tells this story. When Annie was around 4, her great-grandmother passed away. All the family was gathered in the house, and someone noticed that little Annie had disappeared. After a brief search, they found her in a bedroom, rolling on the floor, laughing. "What are you laughing about, Annie?" Little Annie replies, "Great-grandma was tickling me. She came to tell me goodbye." Many years ago, as a 14-year-old staying overnight at a friend's house with 3 other friends. We'd all grown up together except one, who was a cousin of the kid who lived there, and we had never met him before. His older sister, 16 at the time, was the babysitter while the parents were out for the evening. she decides to unearth a Ouija board from a cupboard somewhere and thinks it'll be fun to scare us a little. This was back in the days when you could buy a Ouija board as a board game from your local toy store. So we all gather around, and she starts off with kind of a yes-no lie detector, directing questions to each of us in turn. Cue nervous giggles, but also a feeling of unease, as we all began to feel like this was awesomely amazing, like some kind of secret that we'd all been unaware of before. Things get strange when the sister asks out loud that if anybody is here, please show yourself. A pause of a few seconds, and then a framed picture falls off of the wall onto the floor. Naturally, we all freak out. She calms us down and insists we go back to the board because we have to help whoever knocked the picture down. Faces white, hearts pounding, we start asking questions. And I should also add, the pointer is moving smoothly and rapidly in a completely different manner than before. Are you in the room? Pointer says yes. Are you a man? Pointer says no. Do you need help? Pointer says no. What's your name? Pointer spells out Sarah. Tell us a secret, we ask. Pointer spells out flip a coin. So we did. Someone leaves the table and gets a dime out of the loose change jar in the kitchen. The coin was spinning high up in the air. As we watch it coming down, it stops spinning and serenely falls edge down and lands on the table. When I say land, it didn't bounce, it didn't rock, it just came down and met the table, perfectly balanced on its edge, as if someone had reached out and gently placed it there. Breaking the silence, the pointer starts moving again. Seemingly random numbers. We soon realized their initials, including middle names. Family tradition for my friend and his sister was to have 3 middle names, something not all of us knew. Aside from the brother and the cousin, no one else would have known the older sister's full name, and we'd met the cousin for the first time that night. Somehow every person present had their initials correctly spelled out to them. Pointer pauses, then spells out 3 last words. Children, stop now. It took me many weeks to be able to sleep properly. No one told their parents, and over the years it became our collective shared secret. Couldn't rationalize it then, and I still can't now. I'm super skeptical, but my friend does all kinds of ghost hunting things. I go along with him sometimes because it's very different and always kind of a silly experience. Except once, when we were going over the evidence. I do a lot of his sound work, and I was with him this particular time, so we're going through the audio, and he hears something that sounds like a piano playing. I stick it into Goldwave and clean it up immensely. It fades in slowly and fades out slowly, clear as day. There was no piano in the house, no power in the house, no access to radio. This was in the middle of nowhere, and the closest neighbor was approximately 1 mile away. We also didn't hear it during the time it was playing, so only the equipment picked it up. Gave me chills with no explanation. There were several other unexplainable pictures and noises that we picked up, but nothing to that magnitude. I still have it on my computer. Not a creepy clip at all, but the context makes it so, I think. About 10 years ago, I would have been in my early 20s. Me and 2 of my friends decided one night to head down to some train tracks and break into an old abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. My friend had been there a week before exploring with a buddy, so we climbed through a hole in the fence they had cut. This place was pitch black, and I had no experience with mining yards, so I could only imagine what these giant looming towers and silos were all around us. I could barely make out these darker patches that were giant doors and holes in the structures and hear scuttling noises beyond. Those noises could be easily explained as pigeons or bats, so we weren't too fazed. We continued to our destination. We knew that our town was surrounded by old World War II forts and bunkers, and there was one on a hill in the middle of the mine yard. As we slowly crept toward our goal, I kept hearing small, tapping noises. Not too alarming, just small tink, 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 coming from the dark beyond us, in the direction we had come. We make it to the base of the hill that holds the bunker and find some way to sneak around the only pole light in the yard and up the hill. The whole time, we hear the soft tink, tink, tink behind us. Having made it up the hill and faced with the option to head into the bunker, us brave men decide to pass. Little too creepy for us with no lights to find our way in or out. Instead, we decided to head around back, and this is where things get interesting. We find ourselves standing around a hole with a ladder leading down into a lower level of the bunker with that relentless tink, tink, tink coming from somewhere out in the shadows. Now, on two sides of us are the steep drop-off of the hill, and on the other two sides are the walls of the bunker. We were boxed in on all sides, with only a small path leading out, and with the hole and ladder in the ground at our feet. So we decide this is as good a place as any to light our joint, and so we break it out. With my back to the drop-off hill a few feet behind me and the hole directly at my feet, I try. I'm at the top of a hill without much cover from the wind and having difficulty time getting this thing lit, and I'm getting frustrated. Not to mention that tink, tink, tink is starting to get annoying. Up until this point, I assumed it was a metal sign hanging on the fence that we just climbed through, gently blowing in the wind, so I ignored it. Frustrated with my special little cigarette and getting annoying with the sound, I turned around and stared in its direction. I asked my friends what they thought it was, and tried again to light it. But this time I was facing the noise, and did not try to conceal the flame. As soon as the lighter flashed, the noise banged from a soft tink, tink, tink into a thunderous boom, boom, boom. Oh shit, security guards is the first thing that pops into my head. That booming noise is them running down metal stairs in one of the dark towers. They saw my face when the lighter's fire illuminated it, and now are on the way. All three of us crouched down, halfway between fight and flight, unsure if we should run, hide, or do nothing. We decide to wait. It's too dark for them to find us easily, and they're so loud that we'll hear them the minute they're close. Boom, boom, boom. The noise won't stop, and I swear it's getting louder. How long were those stairs, I think? This is weird. And I swear I heard movement in the grass in the darkness at the bottom of the hill. We all agreed it was probably just the wind and the grass, but decided it was time to sneak our way back out of this place. Slowly crouching through the dark, we moved through the mining yard toward our exit when we run into a little problem. Whatever is making that noise is in between us and the exit. We squat down in the middle of an open gravel road to try to figure out our next move. Safe in thought, it was just too dark for anybody to really see us sitting there in the dirt. But just to be sure, we picked a spot that placed a large chain-link fence between us and that god-awful boom noise. What we think are the charging security guards. Now at this point, I decided to upgrade the guards to cops in my mind and was becoming a bit antsy, but we decided to wait them out. I guess at this point, we all realized that none of this was making any sense, and those guards or cops should have reached the bottom of those stairs by now. That's when things got weirder. With the boom, boom, boom in front of us, and nothing else to do but wait if we want to use our only known exit, we started to hear something else. In the dark, all around us, but somewhere close and on the same gravel we are crouching on, things start to move. There was a thud noise, and then a slow, scraping noise, as something was dragged across the gravel. Then again from somewhere else. Quiet but very close. These noises were all around us. Thud. Then slow dragging across the gravel. But we could not really pinpoint in what direction they were coming from. At this point, I go from rational adult to scared kid, and all I can think of were the people that died at this mine. Or what could be living in those tunnels. In my mind, the noise went from guards and police, shot past ghosts, and now was smack dab in the middle of Goblin and Giant Rat Town. Of course, we get out of there, and decide that climbing the fence behind the mine, running into the woods, and making our way to the highway is our only option. So we pick our butts up out of the dirt and sneak as fast as we can out of there. We're making it. The noises are behind us, and not getting any closer. We find rows and rows of empty coal trains. Perfect. We can walk freely between them, with no chance of being spotted from a distance. With the end of the mine yard close by, and with the protection of the train cars, we relax a little bit, and talk in less hushed whispers. I guess that was a mistake. A few seconds after entering the rows of train cars, the first car exploded in noise. Boom. Whatever was making that noise was right behind us, only a few feet away. I have never in my life, nor will I ever, I'm sure, move so swiftly again. The hundreds of feet between me and the fence outside. The world flew by, and I still don't understand how I got over the 10-foot fence so easily. I just remember leaping off it into the dark. We make it to the road, and head back to town. The road bends around the mine, and we can still hear that relentless boom, boom, boom of something smashing that train. My friends get too uncomfortable talking about it, and seem happy to forget anything weird that ever happened. But my curiosity drives me nuts, and I've gone back a few times over the years. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, and the last time I went by myself, everything had been torn down and taken away. I've lived in some really unsettling places. One of the events that stuck with me the most is probably this. I woke up one morning and, as usual, walked to the mirror to brush my teeth and fix the hair. Now I'm in a relatively small place with a balcony and sink in the same room without openable windows. I look in the mirror and see one of my plants moving, like there's wind blowing against it. I turn around and walk over to the plant. It's next to the door. And check if the balcony door is closed. It was. For some reason, while walking back to the mirror, my eye fell on one of the pens lying on my desk. When I get to the mirror, the first thing I notice are all the pen markings on my face. My heart stops, goosebumps everywhere. I clean up and fled the room. When I came back, the door to the balcony was open. Needless to say, I didn't enjoy being there for quite some time after. I'm going to preface this by saying I went to boarding school for 6 years. This boarding school was in the middle of a one-stop light town and on a hill 800 feet up. The school used to be an old monastery. It was hundreds of years old and enormous. 4 stories, including a basement where there was a boiler room and long hallways. Not all of these stories happened to myself, but the people who told me them were reliable enough to believe. Also, the school didn't want us telling stories to other people because they were afraid that it would make them not want to go to the building due to it being haunted. The first one happened to me. I used to be in charge of cleaning the gymnasium at night. Every student had a job that they had to do, either at night or in the morning, to help take care of the school. Taught you some practical things and all. Anywho, I'm there by myself, getting ready to start sweeping the gym. The gym has 2 floors to it. The upstairs part was the weightlifting area. and you could see it fully from the bottom part of the gym where the basketball court was. As I stepped into the gym, one of the basketballs start rolling a bit. I look around to see if any doors are open. None are. I chalk it up to randomness, but see that it's continuing to roll. As I watch it, it makes a full circle around the entire gym and stops right next to my feet. At this point, I'm a bit scared, but figured it was nothing. I heard a creaking coming from the second floor and look up. There's a girl there, just staring at me. As soon as I make direct eye contact with her, she bolts to the stairs that would take her to me. She let out a scream that I cannot describe. Terrified, I froze in place. Thankfully, she didn't come to me, but took a left and bolted through the main doors of the gym. They didn't open. She just went right through them. I got out of there really quickly. There was a chapel that was in the middle of the school. This is a non-religious school, so we used it for musical performances and all sorts of things like that. I was in choir for the years I was there, so I was very used to performing in it. There was a stained glass wall on one of the windows. Every time you walked in there, it always felt as if someone was watching you. It wasn't only me. There were multiple people that felt that way. There was a big grand piano that was on the opposite side of when you walked in, that was on our stage. People would go in there at night and practice or just play for fun. Most people would just go in there and only turn on the stage lights and leave the rest off while they were practicing. This story isn't something that I witnessed, but was from a friend of mine. She was playing on the piano by herself, just having fun practicing. While in the middle of a song, the keys next to her start going up and down, as if trying to add another part to her song. She jokingly says, "Hey, stop! That doesn't go with what I'm doing." She immediately felt as if someone has boxed her ears and became really dizzy. She freaked out and left. She came crying down to the area where all of the other students were hanging out with their free time. She told me and a few of our friends the story, and it took quite a while to calm her down. Many people have seen a girl in a white dress constantly roaming that area. Another was that the high school of the school was on the highest floor of the building. One night, one of the seniors was studying late trying to graduate. He was working on something at 3 o'clock in the morning, and one of the window blinds started flickering. You know that noise blinds make when the wind goes through them quickly? He thinks nothing of it until it starts happening on the other side of the room. This is an enormous room that fits over 200 students in it. He goes over to the window to close it and finds that it wasn't even open. He laughs and thinks he must have just been really tired. He goes back to continuing studying, and the blinds on the other side of the room start doing the same thing. And then another, and another, until all of them are doing this. There are 30 windows on the top floor. He said he just stood there dazed about the entire situation, until all of a sudden, they stopped all at the same time. He left his stuff and ran to his dorm room. His roommate said he had looked like he'd seen a ghost. Another job I had around the school was preparing the salad bar we had for lunch and dinner. To this day, I would have to get out everything we would need for the day from the basement and the giant freezer we had down there. I would then have to wash it, cut and peel everything. I was one of the first people up every morning to do this. I would get up around 6 o'clock in the morning to do this every day. I hated having to go into the giant freezer on my own when no one else was up and it was pitch black outside. It was one of the few things I never liked doing. The reason for this is this story. I got up at 6 o'clock as usual. As soon as I woke up, I was feeling uneasy. I quickly took my shower and got dressed so I could get to the lunchroom about 6:30. The person in charge of the kitchen was already up and getting everything warmed up. I said hello and checked out what we would need, made a list, and headed down. Now, that feeling of uneasiness was there the entire time. Through my shower, walking down the hallway in the morning, and even when I got to the kitchen. I opened the freezer and felt the cold blast of air. Needless to say, I could have cut diamonds with how cold it was. I step inside and start getting vegetables. As I was reaching for one, I heard a giggle. Not a normal one, but like a small child's giggle. I instantly froze and whipped around. No one. I brush it off and continue. Another giggle. I was like, no way, this is not happening to me. Flick! The lights go off in the freezer. I still had a bit of light because the door was open, and I start seeing the door close and lock from the outside. I bolt for the door because I knew I would be locked in there for at least 15 minutes with the lights off, if I didn't. I caught it right before it closed, and again, I hear the giggle. This time it was right behind me. I screamed. I was 17 and screamed like a girl. I ran upstairs, told the guy I wasn't feeling well, and went and hid in my room until everyone else got up that morning. Four years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night. We had a 2-month-old newborn sleeping in the room next door. I had a video monitor on my bedside table, so that my wife and I could easily check on him. So I clicked the button that turns the video image on, and what I saw scared me like nothing ever before. My baby boy was gone. Now I know that instinct should have made me run right into the baby's room. Instead, I froze. I look over. My wife is sleeping next to me. Finally, I move, but not to run into the other room, like I should have done. Instead, I turn up the volume on the baby monitor. I hear another woman's voice singing a lullaby. I'm not kidding. Another woman was singing to my baby in a very soft, gentle, and melodic voice. I don't remember what song it was. Something like, "Go to sleep, little baby." Finally, my freeze broke. I jumped up, ran through the hallway, and burst into my baby boy's room. And there he was, sound asleep in his crib. No woman, no singing. Turns out the monitor was picking up my next-door neighbor's monitor. They had just bought the same exact video monitor system for their newborn on our recommendation. Nothing supernatural here, but I don't know if I've ever experienced anything else scarier. When I was in high school, I was a terrible student. One time after my usual poor report card, my punishment was to help my dad's janitorial company by cleaning the newest account he had picked up. It just so happened to be a church. Due to the church keeping odd hours, I would usually start cleaning at around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. The first night, my dad helped me out by showing me what to do and helping me. We arrived a little early, around 8 o'clock, so he could meet with the pastor and get the keys. During the brief meeting with the pastor, I get the major creep vibe, but my dad seemed cool with it, so whatever. Cut to an hour or so later. My dad and I are cleaning separate rooms. I feel somebody watching me, so my head shoots around. To my relief, it was my dad. I noticed he was pale, and he said, "You weren't just in the other room with me, were you?" I say no, and he told me that he had just seen me standing there watching him. He had asked what I needed, and I didn't respond. Then he said I put my hand on his shoulder, and just as he started to say, "I get a weird feeling from these people," referring to the people of the church, he told me that just as he finished saying that, the hand on his shoulder squeezed hard enough to bring him to his knees. He turned, and nobody was there. So that probably should have been enough to make us stop cleaning that church. But we had a job to do, so we did it. I start cleaning the church weekly. Nothing else happens. One week, since I had just turned 18, my buddy wanted to take me to the strip club, so he agreed to help me clean if it would speed things up. At one point, he took the trash out the back alley, and suddenly I hear him running back screaming. "What Where are you?" I run out to see what's going on and ask what he's talking about. He said he stopped outside to smoke a cigarette and heard a huge crash of broken glass, and that I started screaming his name in a blood-curdling scream. He had been standing around 30 feet from where I was, and I heard absolutely nothing. To this day, I don't know if he was joking with me, but he swears he wasn't. Finally, I was there cleaning the community part of the church by myself one night. The layout was set of double doors in front of which, followed by an open area. If you walked straight through, you would go straight to the back door, and to either side along the way there were rooms, classrooms, kitchen, daycare. The last 2 doors on the left before you reached the back door were the men's and women's bathrooms. The front double doors were always locked with a chain and padlock wrapped around the outside door handles. When I took the chain off, I would always wrap it around the inside handles, but I wouldn't lock it. It was mainly just to keep the wind from blowing the doors open. So I'm cleaning the closest bathroom to the back door when I hear the water start running in the other bathroom. I stop what I'm doing to see what's going on. I get there and see the toilet filling up, like it had just been flushed. I watch for a moment and see the water fill to the line and stop. Okay, faulty plumbing, I guess. After the toilet stops, I still hear the water running, so I take a quick look for the culprit. Don't see anything, so I head back to the original bathroom. I walk in and immediately the blood rushes from my face when I see all 3 of the bathroom sinks pouring full blast. Steam rising from the sinks, and I realize it's the hot water. I gather my composure and turn all the sinks off. I turn to walk out, and just as I get to the hallway, the front door starts bucking, as if someone was trying to get in. The 2 doors are thrashing back and forth. Because they are only held closed by the chain wrapped around them, they are opening far enough for me to see that nobody is there. If there was somebody there, they would be the worst door opener ever. I don't know what to do, so I just stand in the bathroom doorway. I'm praying and chanting and doing whatever else I can think to do. Suddenly, the doors stop moving, and instantly, the back door, which is about a foot to my left, starts doing the same thing. This is a standard single door which is fully locked, but the knob is turning wildly, and the door is bowing toward me, like someone is pushing it in. There's a window to the left of the door, and again I can see that no one is there. Finally, just as quickly as it started, everything stops. I immediately turn and get in my car and go. I didn't even dust the pulpit. That's how scary it was. I get home and my dad is sitting at the kitchen table awake, which is out of ordinary. He takes one look at me and says, "We are canceling the church account." Nothing more needed to be said. To this day, whenever I ask him about it, he just says he had a bad feeling about it. I'd like to begin by saying that there have been many happenings in this house, but I'll share the most frightening. Backstory: the area where my house is was once prairie, and we have found Native American artifacts lying around the area. When my parents divorced, I was a young teenager, and my mother and I moved into this house. Now, at first, it seemed great. There was plenty of space, and it had a really cool feel to it. However, as time went on, strange things started to happen. The more I noticed them, the more frequent they would become. I heard someone walking downstairs as I was brushing my teeth and would assume it was my mom. But whenever I check, no one will be there. Footsteps began to become a very common occurrence in my house, especially at night. So after some time, I came to the realization that my house was haunted. Now here's where things get really weird. One day, my good friend and I had just gotten done from being out in the sun and decided to retreat to my mom's house. Considering she had been away on a business trip, we figured this would be awesome. My friend and I could go drink or do whatever activities we wanted. We were wrong. We walked inside and headed straight for the basement where it was cooler than the rest of the house. While walking down the stairs, I noticed that the Beatles' Yellow Submarine poster hanging at the bottom of the stairwell was tilted slightly to the left. No bother, I figured. I must have bumped it or something. I fixed it and we walked into the main room. Mind you, we had pictures and posters hanging everywhere in the basement. What my friend and I saw instantly creeped us out. All 10 to 15 pictures on the wall were each tilted slightly to the left, just as the Beatles one had been. But the weirdness of the situation didn't stop there. The storage room, essentially a dirt-floored room that is lifted about 4 feet off the ground, had its doors cracked open. So I walk over and see a golden glow emanating out. There is a pull cord light located about 10 feet from the door that's turned on. So I hop up and into the storage room, crawl on my hands and knees to the light, and turn it off, hoping that all of this had a natural explanation. I call my mom up and ask her about it. She says she has no idea what I'm talking about and hasn't been in the basement for weeks before she left on her trip. Shivers shoot down my spine. I look back into the storage room, and in the dirt there's a footprint. The most distorted and mangled footprint imaginable. I'm frozen in fear. My friend is too. And without words, we look at one another, each feeling a sickening, gut-wrenching feeling. I slam the storage space door shut and lock it, and we bolt out of my house as fast as we can. I'll never forget how sickening and mangled that footprint looked, and thinking that I had crawled in there to turn off the light gives me shivers talking about it right now. My house is definitely haunted. Actually, I don't know if it's a haunting or if my son managed to bring in a poltergeist. They say emotionally disturbed children attract them, so that could be it too. My house was built in 1889. It's inevitable that someone would have died there. There are 2 that we know of for sure. One was a child that died of an illness and was listed as natural causes in 1944. The other, an older gentleman, died of undetermined causes in 1979, both in the house. The boy died in my bedroom. The older man died in the area that was once the enclosed front porch, but is now my daughter's room. The little boy is mean. Not evil, but mean. I have pictures of him in silhouette standing in my bedroom. The only thing he's ever done that was potentially harmful was push a dresser down the stairs. The dresser was sitting at least a foot back from the top of the stairs, on solid ground, not leaning at all. All of a sudden, when my roommate was about 3/4 of the way down the stairway, the dresser comes flying down the stairs. He threw himself out of the way and the dresser hit the bottom of the stairs so hard it literally exploded. The old man doesn't do much, just hangs around in our entryway. He covers my daughter up when she's cold, and she claims to have talked to him, but I've never actually seen him myself. When we moved in, there was a satchel full of dried red peppers hanging in the entryway. I took it down and threw it away. It was put back up. This went on for months before I asked him to please stop putting them back up. They had a potpourri smell to them, and it was making my roommate really sick. He let me throw them away for good after that. There's a female here too, but I know nothing about her. No death of a female was disclosed to us when we bought the house. The guys hear her more than I do. My husband has heard her come on to him when he was the only one in our bedroom, multiple times. I've only heard her once, clear as day, in a room that should have only had my husband in it. I heard her say, "Who's this bitch? I thought you wanted to be my daddy." This, of course, freaked me out. I blessed the house with holy water even though I'm not religious. In fact, I'm leaning toward a belief with no God. But I was still scared. No one slept that night. We heard a woman crying, pounding on the side door, which we use as the front door, begging us to let her in. This door has a peephole, and it was winter, so we could have either seen anyone that was really out there, or seen tracks leading to the porch by looking out our window. There was neither. By dawn, the screaming had faded out to crying, and by 8 a.m., it was completely gone. I think it was a ruse, and she's still here. But that's just a gut feeling. When I was a student, the campus was located on what had only been 20 years before that, an old asylum for the insane. Like batshit crazy people. They did lobotomies there. Most of the buildings had been refurbished into normal school buildings with lecture halls, study group rooms, etc. Seemed pretty normal except the small study group rooms that only had one window. It was 1 square foot, 15 feet up on the wall, with bars in front of it. Yeah. Now walking around the halls at night was creepy enough by itself. But one experience I will never forget. I was the leader of a student-professor team that was in charge of evaluating lectures, professors, timetables, etc. And we usually had our meetings after hours. This one time we were sat on what used to be the old employee cafeteria, according to one of the old professors who had been around for a long time. Now, I had seen the original blueprints from back when it was an asylum, so I knew what buildings had been the women's wing, the men's wing, admin, etc. A little while into the meeting, suddenly all 8 people turn at the same time, everyone hearing what seemed like a woman scream coming from an open window toward the old woman's wing. We all knew we were the only ones at campus at the time. We all heard it, as evidenced by the fact that everyone turned their head at the same time. Absolutely terrifying. Seems a majority of these stories came from schools or churches. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, the common denominator here isn't really a surprise, is it? If you liked this video, please hit that like button. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any new videos. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.